Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we're taking a look at just VTXs. Eachine has taken the back half of these all-in-one cameras and they've made them separate purchases so we can add our own lens, or we can more easily modify an all-in-one to make it fit for an installation that we're looking for. And this is great. And I feel like that there was a video I made some time ago where I actually talked about them doing exactly this. I'm not giving myself any sort of credit, but when I saw this came out, I got very excited because I've had some installations where I thought, if I could just separate the back halves of these cameras without the risk of destroying anything. Because when we're looking at these cameras, there's always the possibility that, like if we look at this custom eWhoop, these are our 3 pins right over here on the side, and then if we cut these and we can wire them straight through, and we can do this themselves. But once we get a tool or something in there, we risk possibly damaging something, and we have less risk with them selling us a part. So good for them, good for us. And these all come with UFL connectors, and they're all very, very similar, especially these two. As we can see, this one, I believe, I marked them on the side. This is the VTX03, so this is the 600 milliwatt version, and it has a little bit bigger board, so it's going to weigh a little bit more. And I think the 600 milliwatt version would be more for if you're flying alone, or you're doing long-range stuff like with fixed wing or things of that nature. And you can see that connector on the top there, that's a UFL connector, and they come with little linear antennas, and we're finding these actually work pretty well. I have a number of videos where I'm flying a vehicle inside the house with just a linear, and I'm getting penetration through multiple levels of the house. When you're outside, that might vary. If you're going behind, thick, dense trees or bushes or something like that, you will get better penetration probably from a circular polarized antenna like this. But we've gone a lot to these because they have decent signal quality, and they don't get damaged like the circular. You land upside down with this little guy, and these leaves start to get damaged. Maybe the joints break. There's just more risk, and I tend to do something like this to try to help protect those antennas. So if I do come in upside down, I have less likelihood that I will damage the circular polarized antennas, because the feature of these antennas and how they work, not to get scientific or anything, but the circularization helps to penetrate other objects, and once you start to bend them out of shape, they start to lose that advantage, and the more they bend, the more advantage we lose. And they also have a much higher risk, as I said previously, of just not working because the joint's broken. And they're bigger and heavier, so if you're doing micros, linear is lighter, so you might be looking for that to increase your thrust. And while I have these two out, these are really good for those sorts of installations. And in the case of this, I would probably use I think this is the 25 milliwatt version. Yes, I wrote on the side so I could keep these straight because they look so similarly. And they've used nice silicone wire. I really appreciate silicone wire. It's easier to work with. It's much more flexible. You don't tend to break the wire off at its connection on either end. You can get it around inside the body of your vehicle much easier. And we've got these separated between the power lead, and then we've got their lead that goes to the camera. They've got a plug in here. We can plug it straight into a camera connection that accepts that, or we can cut these off and solder them in. I think the next thing we're going to see from these is possibly OSD. OSD is either going to, well, we already know on brush boards and brushless boards, the OSD is coming on the flight controller. And I'm wondering if we're going to start seeing more of that with the VTX as well, just so you don't have to necessarily buy, a $40 or $50 board in order to get the OSD features. But we'll see. We'll see what 2017 brings us. And these circular polarized antennas, you can have these on these particular VTXs with this UFL connector, and that's another bonus of the UFL connector, is that you can buy something from, say, like Furious FPV. They have a micro antenna with this same sort of connection, and it just plugs right in there. It just kind of snaps in. And if you catch it on anything, there's the additional bonus that the antenna will pull off. Hopefully you can still find it. But instead of it tearing anything off, maybe the pads that you solder to, or the antenna getting extraordinarily damaged because it stays connected, it will disconnect. And you can see that as an advantage. If you want to try an antenna that's still linear and has that same connection, Team Black Sheep has their own UFL connected linear antenna, so you can give that a try as well. So some of the vehicles I have where I thought this would be a good option, not just the ones I showed here. Like if you want, say you didn't like the view from up here, you could mount the camera right in here, and then you could lay your VTX down this way and have your antenna coming out the back, so your profile would be much smaller, so you could get through actually smaller and smaller gaps. Or in the case of something like this, where you have a really small body and you're adding in a receiver, and like in my case I've got a buzzer, things get kind of tight in there, you can actually mount one of these inside, and it's much smaller than traditional VTX. A traditional VTX looks a lot like, let me get a micro one out. So here we have two fairly small VTXs, and you can see just from a size comparison that those are much smaller. And let's see, this one features a digital readout. This one does not. It just has buttons to change for our channels and switches, and then we have to match that to a chart. So these are a lot smaller, and when you're building something like, say, this Carbon Q130, you can see I've got a, well, this vehicle's dirty. It's been well loved. There's not much space in there because this particular vehicle's got a very small profile, and you can see I've got a VTX down in here and a little whip antenna that I made myself, and this would be the perfect installation. It would fit right down in there, and it would really clean things up for us. Also, one that I made myself where I had a little bit of help in designing, coming up with a 130 size quad. I call this a slammed X because it's a true X. It's got a full-size CCD camera, but getting this VTX in there was a challenge. It probably took me an hour to maybe even an hour and a half to sort out how I could get it in there, and I could still get the camera tilted I wanted. Well, let's push that up just a bit. And still be able to get the reception that I needed, and get everything inside the frame and get prop clearance. This, I could very easily, this is so much thinner. Hopefully I can get this to where you can see it. That's a Hawkeye antenna in there, and this thing is tiny compared to that. This one's very, very similar in size, and there's no comparison. I think unless you have a really good reason, or it turns out these aren't very durable, that we really don't have much of a reason to continue to buy these bigger, heavier VTXs, especially in the case where you don't need an SMA connector. If you're doing micros, I think these are the way to go, whether you're doing a brushless micro or you're doing a brush micro. I think these are going to be very, very popular. So let's get our weight. This is the 600 milliwatt version, and we'll include the antenna. So 2.8, 2.9 grams, right? 2.85 maybe, right in there. And this one, let's see which one this is. This is the 02, as I printed there. So this is the 200 milliwatt version. I'll make sure that gets all on there. 2.6 grams, so only slightly less than this. And let's go down to the 01. Yep, so this one should be about the same as the 02. 2.6 grams. So the 01 and the 02 weigh the same, and the 03 is 0.25 or so grams more. Now, what I think everybody's going to want to see is, how does it work? What's the range like? And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to mount it up, and I'm going to mount up the 01, which is the 25 milliwatt version, and then we'll test the range on that. The space that I test range in, and I've done this for a few vehicles over time, is about 165 to 195 meters, and I think if we get full range there, you can probably expect the same. It's going to vary depending upon your environment. I think if you're looking for 200 milliwatts, it should give you the same range, but we might be able to extrapolate the range that we get from the 01 version and multiply that into the 02. It won't be a straight comparison, but it will give us a pretty good idea what we should expect. And then if you're doing something with the VTX03, you're probably doing something pretty long range, and you're probably flying alone because these 600 milliwatts tend to trample on other people's video signals. So I don't have anything to really test extraordinarily long range with fixed wing. I do have a wing, but I don't fly. I actually don't even know if it operates anymore. It's been sitting so long. So we're going to test the 25 milliwatt version, and then you can extrapolate the results here into the other versions. As I was sitting here getting ready to put this into my 03, something I noticed, this is the connector that goes to the back of the Runcam Swift, and this is the connector that comes with the VTXs. They are slightly different. You may be able to press this one in and it works just fine. I prefer to not try to shove things in and possibly snap off a connection on a $40 or $50 camera. So I dug around in my bin and I found another connector. Of course I could just cut this one off and put it on that one, but I wanted to leave this connector intact as it is so I could use this VTX elsewhere if I chose to. So I dug around in my bin and I found one that is the same. Unfortunately, the one I have is got the nylon or plastic coating wiring, so it's not silicone based. And as you can see there, they are the same, so this should plug right into my Runcam Swift. So what I'm going to do is snip this down and then snip this connector off. And I guess I could always just depin it. I wonder if those connectors are the same in there. Same size. They might be. I'm gonna find out. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna depin this one, and I'm gonna put it into this connector and see if I can't make that work. I was able to get that this connector depinned and put it on here, and it seems to fit. I didn't damage anything. If you're not familiar with the depinning, really you want to use a tool that's very narrow on the edge, and you want to get it underneath these little plastic fingers, and then pry them up ever so slightly. And while you're doing that, pull on the wires. And how I typically do that is I just grab one wire with these two fingers, and then I put my fingernail on the edge. Oh, it is out of frame, sorry. So I grab a wire with these two fingers, and then I put this underneath the edge, and when I pry this up, I just pull. You can see it came right out there. And they've got a little tiny tab here on the top. I'm sure you won't be able to get this on camera because these things are so small. And just in case I get those come down a little bit, I stick my tool underneath that tab. That way when I press it back in, it clicks in and then it doesn't just pull out. So that's a quick tutorial on depinning. That's a useful skill because it's actually quicker than having to cut these wires, tin them up, solder them together, and put your heat shrink on and heat that down. So I should be able to mount this up. And before we do, let's go ahead and weigh this. We know that this setup with the antenna weighs 2.3 grams. And I'm going to be able to subtract from my build this connection, which is 15.1 grams. So we're saving almost 12 grams. And in micros, the lighter you get, that means you have more thrust and more agility. So big bonus there in my book. One thing I'd failed to mention up at this point, these VTXs run, according to the instructions, their operating voltage is 3.2 volts to 5.5 volts. So in my installation, I went off of VCC, which is battery. I have to change the location that I'm going to change power over here to the 5 volt, and I'm going to do that. And that actually, in this particular installation, is an additional bonus because I'll be able to get my receiver more flat down on the board. I'm not going to be putting it down on top of these wires so much, and it will continue to bring my stack down, so it'll actually give me more room. And you know, when you're working on these micros, I've said this I think a couple times in this video already, these little VTXs I think are going to be the way to go, unless you have another reason. And if you have that reason, please leave that down in the comments so we can all learn something. But I think these are going to be a big bonus when it comes to building these micros. I'm sure I'm going to keep at least a few of these in stock in my bins for future builds, provided that this range test goes as expected. Now that I've got everything connected, the last thing we have to cover is the channel changing, which is pretty typical of these little units. We short press to change the channel, so 1 through 8, and then long press to change the band. These are 40 channel, I believe. Yeah, 40 channel VTXs. So right now we're on band 1, channel A, and they have a nice little chart here that tells us. That's typically a channel I use, but to show it, we just press here once. Now we got channel 2, channel 3, channel 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then back to 1. We'll wait a second here. It should start to rotate back and forth. So now we long press 1, 2. Now we got channel B, channel E, F, and R. So I'm going to go back. Whoop, now I'm on channel 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1. I want channel 1. And I'm going to use band A. So now I long press. And there we go. So I was flashing. Now I'm on channel 1A, which is 5865, and that's the channel I typically use. I'm going to mount this all up inside here, and we're going to go out and range test it. Okay, to the location to the field test. And that fence down there should be 168 or 70 meters. We'll measure this again on Google Maps. I'm right next to this building, which isn't ideal, and we also have homes over here, so we might have some interference from those as well. So if you're out in the country, your environment might be actually better than this. I'm going to get set up and then we'll go. All right, here we go. Got a pretty good breeze. We're covering some distance. We're getting a little bit of breakup. We're real close to that fence. I don't want to crash over there. Let's hop just over on the other side of the fence. So now we're below the fence line. Go across the street. Okay, I think it's time to head back. That's pretty good. Let's circle this building. Yeah, I get to break up there. Let's try that a bit lower. Alright, that's enough. It's cold out here. Aha! Okay, that's pretty good. Let's go home and measure that. Okay, there we have the first image that we're looking at, and this is the distance to that fence that I was hovering just on the near side of. And according to Google, and as precise measurements as I can get there, that was 157.74 meters. And then once we hop across the street and we're in the easement there in front of that house, that looks to be about 181 meters. So while this range test doesn't tell us the limit, it does give us a pretty good idea of what to expect up to that range. It is worth noting that once you get past the parking lot about, I would say about 10, maybe 15 meters, it does go down. So that may have impacted our results a little bit, but it's something that you might want to know about the landscape there. And even when we flew around the backside of that building, I was pretty happy with, we still got signal, and I hovered or kind of drove around the backside fairly low to the ground, and we maintained that signal. And I got some height, and I was just overall, I'm pretty pleased. And as the first person this video indicated, I think this is going to be something I'm going to use a lot. And if you're a micro builder, or if you've even got something that's bigger, like this guy, this is a giant 190, barely fits into the shot. Even these can be kind of tight. Look at this VTX, and it's pretty much hanging out the back, and I had to get it in a really good location in order to keep the prop strikes from happening. So these can even be useful for something like this that's much bigger, but because of the frame design is actually kind of compact and tight in there. I'll leave links to these items. We have one in here. I'll leave the links to these items in the description down below if you want to check those out. If you have any questions or comments about these products, please let me know and I will do my best to answer them. And thank you for watching.